All right, so again, my name is Heather. I am joined for today's presentation by my colleague Kelsey Klobosky, a senior web accessibility specialist here at Accessible Web. I'm going to get us started and then I will hand off about halfway through to Kelsey. So today we're going to explore what keyboard navigation means in the context of digital accessibility and why it's such an important part of the user experience in particular. We'll look at who relies on keyboard navigation, why so many types of assistive technology depend on it, and how keyboard input can be transformed into meaningful output that helps people navigate, understand, and use digital content. Once we establish this foundation, then we'll connect the user experience side of things to the technical practices that make them possible. So we have our first slide up for accessibility. I'm going to read it out. It says, what is keyboard navigation? There are 5 bullet items. The first one says move keyboard focus, then navigate page structure, activate links and buttons. What is enter information? And 5th bullet item says make selections. So yeah, let's start out with a simple question. What do we mean when we say keyboard navigation? Keyboard navigation is the ability to move through and use a website or application without relying on a mouse or other pointing device. So that includes moving between links, buttons, menus, form fields, and other interactive elements. It also means knowing where keyboard focus is and moving through a page in a logical and predictable way. Keyboard navigation also makes it possible to enter information, choose options, and interact with forms and other types of controls using the keyboard alone. So whether someone is reading information, filling out a form, making a purchase, or submitting an application, keyboard navigation can help make all these everyday activities possible. Slide 2 is titled, Who Relies on Keyboard Navigation? Again, for accessibility, I'm going to go ahead and just read out the slide content. There are 4 bullets on this slide. The first one says blind users, users with low vision, users with limited hand or arm mobility, and users with temporary or situational limitations. So not everyone uses a keyboard for the same reason, but for some people, it is the primary way they interact with and use websites and applications. So blind users, for example, often navigate without a mouse. Instead, we use keyboard commands with a screen reader to find information, move between controls, and accomplish everyday tasks. Users with low vision may use screen magnification. This makes following a mouse pointer quite difficult. Keyboard navigation helps to move efficiently while keeping up their place on the page or the screen. Users with limited hand or arm mobility may rely on the keyboard because using a mouse is difficult, painful, or not possible. People with temporary or situational limitations also rely on keyboard navigation. Someone perhaps recovering from an arm injury, experiencing repetitive strain, or just working without a mouse, they may find keyboard to be the most effective way to navigate and complete their work. So although each group uses the keyboard navigation a little bit differently, they all rely on it to independently find information and accomplish what it is they came to do in the digital environment. Slide number 3. Why does assistive technology depend on keyboard navigation? Slide content here reads, navigate predictably, track keyboard focus, activate controls, and works across platforms. So if assistive technologies are all so different, why is it that they all rely on keyboard navigation? And the simple answer is that they all build on the same interaction model. So browsers, operating systems, and assistive technologies all understand keyboard input. So this shared framework gives users a reliable way to move through a page, know where they are, and operate things like buttons, links, menus, and form controls. Instead of creating their own navigation methods, assistive technologies build on this common foundation or interaction model of keyboard input. And this is one of the reasons why keyboard accessibility is considered a cornerstone of digital accessibility as a whole. Slide number 4, we're going to look at how some specific assistive technologies use keyboard navigation. So those 4 technologies that we're going to cover here are listed: screen readers, screen magnification, speech recognition, and switch access systems. And I will pause here just to say this is not an exhaustive list for sure, but there are these are some very common use cases. So we talked about keyboard navigation as a common interaction model. Now let's look at how some different assistive technologies build on that foundation. So first up, a screen reader uses keyboard commands to move through a page and translates that information into speech or braille output so the user knows what has focus and what they can do next. Screen magnifier follows keyboard focus to keep the active area of the screen in view, helping users to stay oriented as they navigate. Speech recognition software converts spoken commands into keyboard commands, allowing users to navigate, activate controls, and enter information without ever touching a keyboard. And switch access systems convert switch input into, you guessed it, keyboard commands, moving focus one element at a time and activating controls when users make a selection. So each technology provides a different experience or output for the user based on their individual needs, but they all depend on the same input method, which is keyboard interaction. And this provides meaningful access to websites and applications for many groups of users. And as I kind of wrap up our user experience side of keyboard navigation here, I do want to just offer one final thing, and that is to say that when we talk about keyboard navigation, it's easy to kind of assume or let our brain sort of by default go to desktop environment in particular, right? Because that's where we think about using keyboards. But keyboard navigation is equally important in the mobile environment for mobile browsing and using mobile applications. And this is because there are certain user groups for whom perhaps doing the sort of fiddly little precise touch gestures can be really difficult or impossible. And for other groups of users, sometimes screen reader users, if they need to enter large blocks of text or long complex passwords, filling out long forms, that sort of thing, having an external keyboard available for accuracy and efficiency in those situations can be really important. So I would ask that you do not neglect to consider keyboard navigation in that mobile environment. So now we've defined what keyboard navigation is, we've explored who relies on it, and looked at why some assistive technologies use it as a common foundation. Now let's go ahead and connect these user experiences to the technical practices that make them possible. And I'll hand it over to you, Kelsey.
All right, thanks, Heather. So we want to talk about the technical requirements and some of the techniques that go into keyboard navigation and making it work. But it's really key to keep in mind that the reason why we're doing these things is to communicate and make interactions available to all of the users and the user experiences that Heather was just describing. So in terms of keyboard navigation, I first want to talk about the technical requirements. I'm thinking this is kind of some of the code and interaction requirements that we have with those. And this is focused on interactive components. So interactive components in a web or mobile interface, they need to be focusable. That means the component can receive keyboard focus. And when we talk about keyboard focus, we essentially mean the system's attention. It's a thing that is currently holding the attention, and when you activate, that is what's going to be activated. So with a mouse, we hover about a button and click, it's moving the system's focus and activating that component at the same time. With keyboard, those two actions happen separately, where you move focus to a component, and then the user has control over whether to activate it or not, or if they continue to move focus to other interactive components on the page. Those components also need to be operable. That means that the component can be activated using the keyboard alone, and typically we do that with the Enter key or the spacebar key. So again, I definitely run into issues where we'll see a component that is keyboard focusable, but if we try to activate it with the keyboard, nothing happens. So we need to make sure that both of those pieces are in place for a component to work correctly for someone using keyboard navigation or any of those assistive technologies that are working off of that keyboard navigation model. Focus also needs to move in a logical order. Users should be able to predict and understand where their keyboard focus is going to move as they navigate or as they activate components within an interface. Some coding strategies for making components focusable, operable, and in a meaningful focus order. First, we talk about, if you've been to other webinars, you've probably heard us talk about this strategy a lot, but we definitely support taking a native approach first. Our examples are from HTML, though this same consideration applies if you're doing mobile development. Just the what is a native component just looks a little bit different. But a native component, such as a button element in HTML, is keyboard focusable and operable by default. In terms of as a developer or coder, you have to do a lot less work if you're using a native interactive element like a button. A lot of that keyboard navigation requirements are handled for you by the browser and by the operating system. If you're making a custom component, an example of that in HTML being a div with a role of button or a div that performs the action of a button, we can make it focusable by adding a tab index of 0 using the code tab index equals 0. And we can make it operable using JavaScript. So essentially you have to make sure that the div, the component that is interactive, it's not just clickable with a mouse. It can also be activated using keyboard strokes. Again, typically the Enter and or spacebar key. For focus order, our native strategy here is that by default, focus order of keyboard moves in the reading order of the page in terms of moving in the reading order of the code. So whatever comes first in your code is going to receive focus first, and then the second interactive component will get it second, and it will proceed in that order. So that's definitely the most straightforward way to manage focus. If you need to manually set focus, either because the visual order doesn't match the intended reading order, or if you need to do a custom focus movement, like a pop-up comes up and focus needs to move into that pop-up, that needs to be handled using JavaScript typically. Now, keyboard navigation also has some visual requirements. As Heather discussed, there are users of keyboard navigation who rely on vision when interacting with their interface. They're looking at the interface visually, and they need to know where their keyboard focus is in terms of when I hit the Enter key, what is going to be activated. So that indication we call the focus indicator. It tells the user visually what component currently has the system's focus and is going to be activated if they press the Enter key. And it visibly marks where keyboard focus is currently located. The most common focus indicator is an outline. We have a screenshot here from our website that shows a services button in focus. It has a dark blue outline compared to the other components in the navigation bar here that don't have that dark blue outline. So that's the visual indication of, hey, if I press this Enter key, this services button is what's going to be activated. Some requirements under the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are that focus indicators must be at least partially visible. They must be persistently visible while component is in focus. We don't want the focus indicator to pop in and then disappear or fade away. That focus indicator must reach at least 3:1 contrast, and it must not rely on a change of color alone. So having something like an outline, an underline that is at least 3:1 contrast, those are all great strategies to make it visually clear where the user's keyboard focus is. We recommend doing keyboard testing to confirm that the keyboard navigation is working as intended. So some tips for doing some keyboard testing. First is to make sure you've enabled keyboard navigation. If you're on a PC, it's enabled by default. If you're on a Mac, then you may need to change a setting to enable full keyboard access. I did not include a bullet point about mobile, but for mobile, you can attach an external keyboard, like a Bluetooth keyboard often works really well, so you can do this testing on mobile platforms as well. Then use basic navigation to navigate through the content and make sure that you can access and use all of the interactivity that a user on a mouse or using a touch interaction would be able to do. So first, I recommend clicking with your mouse into the page. That moves your system's focus into the page. And from there, you can start doing keyboard navigation. So to move forward is the Tab key. To move backward is Shift Tab. To activate is typically going to be the Enter key. And then for navigating inside complex widgets, you may also use arrow keys. So things like a grid of interactive components, a drop-down list of options. Those are really common, more complex widgets we see that once you've moved focus to the kind of the overall component, you use your arrow keys to move inside. So always worth checking if you're having trouble getting into some pop-up or some interactive content, double check that whether the arrow key will work for you. And if not, then you need to investigate the keyboard navigation issues that are happening. It's also important when doing this testing to know the options and the limits of keyboard testing. One thing I definitely recommend if you're trying to keyboard navigate in content and it looks like nothing's happening, it could be that the components aren't receiving focus, or it could be they're receiving focus, but that visible focus indicator has a problem. It's invisible or it's really low contrast, so it's hard to see. So it's definitely valid to try and check which of those things might be happening. Also important to keep in mind, keyboard navigation, really valid and important type of accessibility testing. It is not the same as testing with a screen reader. Keyboard navigation and screen reader use should be tested independently of each other. They should both be tested. Heather and I previously did a webinar about screen reader testing specifically. I recommend you check it out in the archive. We just wanted to bring it up here that just because you've tested on keyboard does not mean, okay, this works great on keyboard, this is going to work great on screen reader, or vice versa. It worked great on screen reader, may not mean it's going to work great for someone who's on keyboard alone. All right, and some tips for focus management. So this is thinking about making that decision about where focus should go as someone is interacting with the content. Two key concepts to keep in mind is user control and logical and predictable movements. So we're really trying to keep those two things in mind when making decisions about where should a user's keyboard focus go as elements on the page are changing or as content on the page changes. So it's like some really common interactions where we might be managing focus are when the user activates a link, we expect that focus is going to move to the target of that link. That might be a new page that the link takes you to, or if it's an internal link that takes the user to another section of the same page, their keyboard focus should also move to that new section of the page with the link movement. But conversely, if someone's editing an input, they're typing text into a text field, they're checking a checkbox, they're checking a radio button, we want focus to remain on the input. We want it to stay put so the user stays oriented, they get that confirmation that their input worked, and then they have that control of when to move on to the next element of the form, or they get to move on to the submit button. So there's where we have these two pieces of thinking about user control and logical and predictable movements. Now, when we activate a button, it depends. There are scenarios where we want to keep focus on that button, and there's scenarios where we may want to move focus somewhere else on the page based on that activation. So for example, a button that expands content like an accordion, we typically want to keep focus on that button. It's on the button itself. Keep the control with the user on when they want to move forward into that expanded content. But a button that opens a pop-up dialog, typically we want to move focus into the pop-up dialog so that the user gets that new content, has access to it, doesn't have the issue of trying to hunt around to see where that pop-up happened. Or if it opens a pop-up menu, like a drop-down list of options, it can be really common for focus to move into that pop-up menu. Now, with some of these, like this is getting into side tangent areas where when we have these things coded correctly and we have good accessible names on these components, it gives users a hint or an expectation of what to expect to happen when they activate that component. But these are some of the focus movements or focus management that we would expect to see with these types of components. And some additional resources here, I recommend the ARIA Authoring Practices Guide. That's ARIA, ARIA. And this has a great section on managing keyboard navigation for custom components and different types of components, and is a great resource for understanding recommendations in this area. And finally, how Accessible Web can help. We are here to support you in a lot of areas of digital accessibility, including your keyboard accessibility, but other areas as well. We offer web accessibility software, and consulting and training, which are intended to be supports for you to be doing that work and monitoring in with your um, maybe more in-house or managing it on your own or managing that information. We also offer accessibility audits where we do the testing on your behalf and provide a detailed report via our platform and support you in remediating those issues. And we also can provide voluntary product accessibility templates or VPATs. This is a type of accessibility report that it conveys the current accessibility of your website or product. And all of these pieces work together. All of these pieces can and do include questions about keyboard navigation. So just always recommend reaching out when you need support in this or any other area of digital accessibility.
Cool.
And with that, I think we will head into our Q&A.